All right, folks, let us finally finish this course. Finally, it's very exciting. I'm excited. So again, we are going to cover the last part of the chapter, and then we'll be done with the material for the final, and then you guys can finally smile again. All right, so now we're going to deal with issues of uncertainty with respect to the market as a whole. The presence of uncertainty can have a profound impact on the ability of markets to efficiently allocate resources. So the reason for it is that there may be what's called asymmetric information, meaning that one side of the market may have more information than another. So when some people in the market have better information than others, the people with the least information may choose not to participate in the market. Asymmetric information can result in a situation where people with the least information rationally refuse to participate in the market. Two specific manifestations of asymmetric information are what we call adverse selection and moral hazard. Adverse selection arises when an individual has hidden characteristics that she knows but that are unknown by the other party in an economic transaction. Moral hazard generally occurs when one party takes what are called hidden actions that is known that it knows another party cannot observe. So let's think about each of these in turn. So adverse selection. So adverse selection, in the most general sense, basically refers to a situation where if you provide a certain sort of protection to people, then that will tend to attract those people that need the protection the most. So like car insurance or any kind of insurance, if it wasn't mandated to have these things, then the people that would wind up buying car insurance are the people that are most likely to get in car accidents. So adverse selection refers to a situation where a selection process results in a pool of individuals with economically undesirable characteristics. Consider an industry in which all firms allow their employees, let's say, 5 days of paid sick leave. One firm decides to increase the number of paid sick leave by, let's say, 5 to 10 days to attract more workers. If the workers have hidden characteristics that the firm cannot distinguish between healthy and unhealthy workers, the plan will likely lure many workers away from other firms. The type of workers the firm is most likely to attract are those who know that they are frequently ill and thus value sick leave the most. From the first point of view, the policy attracts undesirable workers. In economic terms, the policy results in adverse selection. All right, so moral hazard is a situation essentially where because you provide a safety net for people, they tend to engage in riskier behavior. So during the 2008 crisis, there was a lot of debate on whether or not we should bail out the banks and pay like $1 trillion out to banks out of the blue in order to make sure that they don't go under. Obviously, the economy did need that. We needed it, or else we would have gone into another Great Depression. Nobody would have wanted that. We would still be in an economic slump as a result of it if the government had not taken the action they took. But on the flip side of that, they basically created a situation in which the banks know that if things get as bad as they got, that they will be bailed out. And so, therefore, that does create the impetus, it provides an incentive for riskier behavior by the banks. So sometimes when two parties engage in a contract, one party agrees to protect the other party from economic loss. Moral hazard exists if a contract induces the party that is protected from loss to take hidden action that can harm the other party. Consider the principal agent problem that we've been talking about in this course. Again, the problem of like having those in charge either of the resources of the firm or the management of the firm having their interests aligned with those that work for them, either the managers for the stockholders or the workers for the managers. Firm profits partly depend on a manager's effort, which is unobservable to the owner and thus a hidden action. A fixed salary contract coupled with hidden action of the manager, a lack of effort, results in moral hazard. As we learned in Chapter 6, the owner can overcome the problem by either monitoring the manager, taking away the hidden action, or making the managers pay contingent on firm's profits, taking away the manager's insurance against economic loss. All right, so again, those are two ways that market transactions may break down as a result of hidden characteristics or hidden actions via adverse selection or moral hazard. Now, there's another issue with respect to signaling and screening. So a lot of what goes on in the economy is signaling. Like we send signals about our interest in buying something. We send signals about our willingness to pay. If we're consumers, firms send signals about the quality of the product, what's being sold. They might send signals about their costs. And there's certain characteristics that the signals have to have in order for them to be credible and for them to be effective within a market situation. So signaling occurs whenever an informed party sends a signal or indicator of his or her hidden characteristics to an uninformed party in an attempt to provide information about these hidden characteristics. In product markets, firms use a host of devices to signal product quality to consumers: money-back guarantees, free trial periods, packaging labels that indicate the product has won maybe a special award or that the manufacturer has been in business since a certain time period, 1933. For a signal to provide useful information to an otherwise uninformed party, the signal must be observable by the uninformed party. It must also be costly to fake. It must be difficult to fake the signal, right? So you guys getting your college degree, it needs to be difficult to fake having a college degree. That's why firms will verify college degrees with the universities that they're from. Or else anybody would be willing to say, yeah, I have a college degree. You should hire me. I'm really smart. And there also has to be full disclosure. If there isn't a full disclosure of all information, then all one can assume is that something is being hidden. So if you're not completely showing your cards, then it's likely you're hiding a card. So those two things have to be present in order for a signal to be credible, to be effective. Screening occurs when an uninformed party attempts to sort individuals according to their characteristics, because again, the characteristics that they're looking for may not be obvious, they may be hidden. So this sorting may be achieved through a self-selection device. Individuals who have information about their own characteristics are presented with a set of options, and the options they choose reveal their characteristics to the uninformed party, like the recommender systems that Netflix and Amazon uses. Based on the options that you guys have chosen to enjoy via Netflix or to purchase via Amazon, then that reveals you self-select yourself as a specific type of person. I like comedies, I like dramas, I like romance movies, whatever. And so then they know to target those movies to you. All right, now let us move into the final section of the chapter, the auctions, the final section of the course. All right, here we go. So in an auction, as you know, potential buyers compete for the right to own a good, service, or more generally, anything of value. Auctions are important for managers to understand because in many instances, firms participate as either the auctioneer or the bidder in the auction process. What the bidder's risk preferences, while the bidder's risk preferences can affect bidding strategies and the expected revenue the auctioneer receives, we'll assume throughout this section that bidders are risk neutral. All right, so let's go over the 4 types of auctions. So there's 4 basic types of auctions. There's an English ascending bid auction. There's a first price sealed bid auction. There's a second price sealed bid auction. And there's what's called a Dutch descending bid auction. We'll go through each of these in turn right now. These auctions differ with respect to one, the timing of the bidder decisions, whether the bids are made at the same time or sequentially, and 2, the amount the winner is required to pay. So keep these 2 sources of differences of auctions in mind as we discuss each type of auction. All right, so first we're going to look at your classic auction that you are most familiar with, which is called an English auction, the type you would see in an eBay site. So in an English auction, a single item is to be sold to the highest bidder. The auction begins with an opening bid. The bids continue to rise in a sequential fashion until no other participant wishes to increase the bid. The highest bidder, the only bidder left, pays the auctioneer his or her bid and takes possession of the item. In an English auction, the bidders continuously obtain information about one another's bids as everybody reveals their bids, and the winner is the one who values the item the most. All right, first price sealed bid auction. So in a first price sealed bid auction, the bidders all write their bids down on pieces of paper at the same time without knowledge of the other player's bids. The auctioneer collects the bids and awards the item to the highest bidder. The high bidder pays the auctioneer the amount that he or she has written on the piece of paper. So in the first price sealed bid auction, the highest bidder wins the auction, just as in the English auction. However, unlike in the English auction, the bidders do not know the bids of the other players. All right, the next auction is called the second price sealed bid auction. A second price sealed bid auction is similar to a first price sealed bid auction in that bidders submit bids without knowledge of the bids submitted by others. The person submitting the highest bid wins, but only has to pay the bid by the second highest bidder. And then finally, there is a Dutch auction. In a Dutch auction, the seller begins by asking for a very high price for the item, a price so high that he or she is certain no one will be willing to buy it. The auctioneer then gradually lowers the price until one buyer indicates a willingness to buy the item at that price. At that point, the auction is over. The bidder buys the item at the last announced price. So that's how a Dutch auction works. It starts at a high price and comes down, much like that approach that we talked about in, I think, the last chapter, where we were talking about perfect price discrimination and how maybe used car salesmen might set a price high and then have you talk them down to like their willingness to pay, essentially their reservation price, thereby revealing the highest price they're willing to pay, thereby being able to price discriminate perfectly by charging each consumer the price that they're willing to pay. The information available to bidders in a Dutch auction is identical to that in a first price sealed bid auction. No information is available about the bids of other players until the auction is over. In each case, the bidder pays what he or she has bid for the item. All right, so that gets us to a principle that basically lays out the fact that there is a strategic equivalence between the Dutch auction and the first price sealed bid auctions. The Dutch and the first price sealed bid auctions are strategically equivalent. That is, the optimal bids by participants are identical for both types of auctions. So again, that's the first price sealed bid auction where everybody writes down their bid. Nobody knows what anybody else's bid is. The person that has the highest bid gets the item and pays what they value it at. And a Dutch auction, price is set exorbitantly high, brought down until somebody is willing to bid, and then that person wins. All right, so an important thing to think about, though, is like, what do all the bidders know about the thing that is being bid upon? So what is the information structure of the auction? So the four basic types of auctions differ with respect to the information that bidders have about the bids of other players. In analyzing an auction, it's important to consider the information players have about their valuations of the item being auctioned. One possibility is that each bidder in an auction knows for certain what the item is worth. And furthermore, all players know the valuations of other players in an auction. So it's basically the case of perfect information. Everybody knows how much the item is worth. Everybody knows how much all the other players value the auction item for. So again, that's the case of perfect information. Rarely do bidders, though, in an auction enjoy perfect information. These circumstances reflect situations of asymmetric information, which is generally what you will find in an auction. So you might have what's called a case of independent private values. So the term private value here refers to the fact that the item's worth to an individual bidder is determined by personal tastes that are known only to that bidder. So each bidder may have, again, a very subjective valuation of the item that's being bid upon. The fact that these private values are independent means that they do not depend on the valuations of others. Another possibility is you may have correlated value estimates. So in many auction settings, bidders are unsure of the item's true valuation. So they might be bidding on something they have an idea of what it's worth, but they don't actually know what it's worth, because maybe it's like some piece of land or something that could or could not have oil beneath it. Bidders may have access to different information about an item's actual worth and thus may form different estimates of the item's value. This type of information environment may lead to what's called affiliated or correlated value estimates. The higher one bidder's value estimate, the more likely it is that other bidders also have high value estimates. A special case of this environment is the common value auction, which arises when the true underlying value of the item is the same for all bidders. So again, the common value is different from the private values in that there is a value to the item and everybody pretty much shares that, versus a private value which is specific to a person's individual taste, circumstances, etc. In the case of a common value auction, individual tastes play no role in shaping the bidder's value estimates. The uncertainty stems purely from the fact that different bidders use different information to form their estimates of the common value of the item. So again, independent private values dependent on subjective criteria, and in the correlated value estimates, there is some common value, but the way that the folks go about assessing that value is different, and therefore there will be differences in their actual valuations, even though they do all have a common value. There's an affiliated value. So if everybody kind of values it high, if you value it high, then it's likely everybody else is valuing it high. But again, there'll be variation in those valuations based on the methods used to gain information about what the value is of what is being bid on. All right, so a good example of a common value auction is the government's use of auction to sell oil, gas, and mineral rights to prospective firms. The true value of these rights, the amount of oil, gas, or ore underneath the earth, is unknown to the bidders, but whatever the amount, the value is the same for all bidders. Each bidder forms an estimate of the true common value by taking seismic readings and performing other tests. Even though the true value is the same for all bidders, each bidder will likely obtain different estimates through their own tests. All right, now let's look at the optimal bidding strategies for risk-neutral bidders in different circumstances. All right, so strategies for independent private value auctions. Again, these are auctions in which everybody has their own sort of subjective valuation of what is being bid upon. So it is easiest to characterize optimal bidding strategies for environments in which the bidders have independent private valuations. So this principle kind of sums it up. The optimal bidding strategy for an English auction. So English auction, again, like an eBay type auction, ascending bid auction. A player's optimal bidding strategy in an English auction with independent private valuations is to remain active until the price exceeds his or her own valuation of the object. Consider an English auction in which the auctioneer starts with a low price and gradually raises it until only one bidder remains. A bidder who remains in the auction after the price exceeds his valuation risks having to pay more for the item than it's actually worth to him. All right, so that's how, again, that's a private value situation that is reflected in an English auction. So basically, bidding your valuation is the best strategy in that circumstance. The optimal bidding strategy for a second price sealed bid auction. Again, this is the auction in which everybody writes down a bid and the auctioneer opens up all the bids and the highest bid wins, but they only have to pay the second highest bidder bid. So in a second price sealed bid auction with independent private values, a player's optimal strategy is to bid his or her own valuation of the item. This is a dominant strategy for that type of bidder. Since the winner pays the bid of the second highest bidder, not his or her own bid, it does not pay for bidders to bid more or less than their own valuation. A player could bid more than the item was worth to her to increase the likelihood of being the high bidder, but if the second highest bid is less than his actual valuation, this strategy will yield no additional returns. If the second highest bid is above his valuation, then he may win but have to pay more than her actual valuation. The player will never bid less than his valuation in this, again, the second price sealed bid auction. A player who bids less merely reduces the chance of winning since the player never pays his or her own bid. All right, optimal bidding strategy for a first price sealed bid auction. In a first price sealed bid auction with independent private value, a bidder's optimal strategy is to bid less than his or her valuation of the item. So if there are n bidders, there's however many bidders there are, who all perceive valuations to be evenly or uniformly distributed between a lowest possible valuation of L. So L is the lowest possible private value that a person might have for the good, and the highest possible valuation of H, then the optimal bid for a player whose own valuation is V is given by this relationship here, where their bid is equal to their own valuation minus the difference from their valuation to the lowest bid divided by the number of participants in the auction, where B denotes the player's optimal bid. So the greater the number of bidders, which is N, or the closer the number, or the closer the bidder's valuation to the lowest possible valuation of the other bidders, V minus L. So the closer this is to 0, or the bigger this is, which will get this close to 0 by dividing a number by a big number, you're getting closer to 0. So either way, if this number is closer to 0, then the closer the optimal bid will be to the player's actual valuation of the item. So as this term approaches 0, then if there's a lot of folks in the auction, then the player should bid something close to what they actually value the good at. And the difference between what they value and the lowest bid, so if their bid is very close to the lowest bidder, then again they should also bid very close to what they actually value the item at. But if their valuation is very different from the lowest, or if there aren't that many folks involved in the auction, then they shouldn't bid very close to what they actually value the item at. They should bid less than that. So the more people there are, the lower they should bid. The higher their valuation is to the lowest bidder, the lower they should bid as well. Since players do not know the valuations or bids of others and must pay their own bid if they win, again, this is a sealed price highest bidder auction. Players have an incentive to bid less than their own valuation of the item. By bidding less than his or her own valuation of the item, a player reduces the probability of submitting the highest bid. The more competitive the auction, that is, the greater the number of other bidders, the closer a player should bid to his or her own true valuation. Quick demonstration problem to see how this works. Consider an auction where bidders have independent private values. Each bidder perceives that valuations are evenly distributed between $1 and $10. Sam knows his own valuation is $2. Determine Sam's optimal bid strategy in 1, a first price sealed bid auction with 2 bidders, 2, a Dutch auction with 3 bidders, and 3, a second price sealed bid auction with 20 bidders. All right, so with only 2 bidders, we're going to have n equals 2. So the lowest possible valuation is going to be 1 because, again, the bidder perceives the distribution of valuations to range from $1 to $10. So the lowest possible valuation is $1. Sam's own valuation is $2. So Sam's optimal sealed bid in this case will be, again, this is a first price sealed bid auction. We'll be using the formula, plugging in 2 minus 1 for the lowest possible bid, which is $1, divided by 2 people. In this case, equals $1.50. Since a Dutch auction is strategically equivalent to a first price sealed bid auction, we can use that information to determine the price at which Sam should declare his willingness to buy the item. So in this case, again, we have I'm trying to figure out why this is different than this one. Forget why they're different. 3 people versus 2. Oh, because the setup told us there's 3. Sorry. The setup said that there's 3 bidders. That's why. All right. So there's 3 bidders. There's more folks, and therefore the bid should be higher. Again, it is strategically equivalent to the first price sealed bid auction. And so if the circumstances were the same, the optimal bid would be the same. But in this case, because there's more bidders involved, which I totally forgot for some reason, that means that Sam should bid something closer to his own valuation, in this case being $1.67. Sam's optimal strategy is to let the auctioneer continue to lower the price until it reaches $1.67. And 3, a second price sealed bid auction with 20 bidders. So Sam should bid his true valuation in a second price sealed bid auction, which is $2. As we mentioned earlier, again, if they don't bid the optimal price, then they either risk losing or they risk overpaying for the good. All right, strategies for correlated value auctions. So again, that was the private values. This is the correlated value auctions. So optimal bidding strategies with affiliated or correlated values are more difficult to describe for 2 reasons. 1, the bidders do not know anyone's valuation of the item, including their own. 2nd, the auction process itself may reveal information about how much the other bidders value the object. To illustrate, suppose there's 100 firms bidding for the right to an oil lease in a first price sealed bid common values auction. Each bidder is uncertain about the true amount of oil underneath the earth, yet it is worth the same to each bidder. Before participating in the bidding process, each firm runs an independent test to obtain an estimate of the amount of oil in the ground, which varies across firms. Some firms think there's more oil in the ground than others, not because they are better informed, but due just to purely random chance. In this case, the firm that submits the winning bid is the firm with the most optimistic estimate of the amount of oil in the ground. Expressed differently, one of the spoils of victory in a common values auction is the winner's curse. Winning conveys news to the victor that all other firms think the lease is actually worth less than he or she paid for it. So the chance that the 99 other firms are wrong and the winner is right in this case would be very slim. So if the bidders could maybe pool their information and average it, they would have a more precise estimate of the true amount of oil in the ground. To avoid the winner's curse, a bidder must revise downward his or her value estimate to account for that fact. So that gets us to the principle of avoiding the winner's curse in these correlated value auctions. In a common value auction, the winner is the bidder who is the most optimistic about the true value of the item. To avoid the winner's curse, a bidder should revise downward his or her private estimate of the value to account for this fact. The winner's curse is most pronounced in sealed bid auctions because players do not learn anything about the other player's value estimates until it's too late to act on it. In contrast to an English auction, the auction process provides information to the bidders. Each bidder shows up at the auction with an initial estimate of the item's value. During the auction process, each bidder gains information about the item's worth and can revise his or her own value estimate accordingly. As the price gets higher and higher, and the other bidders, you should realize that. As the price gets higher and higher, and the other bidders, you should realize that the other bidders also estimate the object to be of high value. So there's a typo in there somewhere, but anyway, as the price gets higher and higher, basically that reveals that other bidders estimate the object to be of high value. Again, information is being revealed in the English price in the English auction. By affiliation, you then should revise upward your estimate of the item's worth, since higher value estimates by other bidders make it more likely that the value to you is also high, that your information was imperfect and you actually undervalued the subject of the auction. Conversely, if you observe that many bidders dropped out at a low price, you should revise downward your private estimate. The optimal strategy in an English auction with affiliated value estimates is to continue to bid so long as the price does not exceed the value estimate you obtain based not only on your private information, but on information gleaned through the auction process. So again, this is a process of updating your information, updating your bid through the bidding process versus just like sticking to your own valuation. All right, now let's turn to the final section, which deals with expected revenues and alternative types of auctions. So let's take the perspective of auctions from the auctioneer. and sort of consider what are the best auctions to use to maximize revenues. Suppose an auctioneer is interested in maximizing her expected profits. As the table shows, the best auction from the auctioneer's viewpoint depends on the nature of the information the bidders hold. So either they're going to be independent private values or affiliated value estimates. With independent private values, all the revenues are going to be equivalent, but with affiliated value estimates, you're going to have certain auctions yielding higher revenues than others, and we'll go over why. So with independent private values, we have revenue equivalence. In independent private value auctions, all auctions yield the same revenue. With independent private values, players already know their valuations and therefore learn nothing useful about the item's worth during the auction process. The price paid by the winner in an English auction is the second highest valuation. This is also the case in a second price auction. In a first price auction, each bidder has an incentive to shade her bid. In effect, each bidder estimates how far below her own valuation the next highest valuation is, and then shrinks his or her bid by that amount. The player who wins the auction is the one with the highest valuation, paying an amount to the auctioneer that is, on average, equal to the second highest valuation. Thus, with independent private values, the expected revenue earned by the auctioneer in a first price auction is identical to that in an English and a second price auction. Since the Dutch auction is strategically equivalent to the first price auction, the expected revenues under the two auctions will also be the same. For these reasons, again, all four of these auctions generate the same expected revenues for the auctioneer when bidders have independent private values. So again, table 12.1 shows that revenue equivalence does not hold for affiliated value estimates. Players shrink their bids below what they would have bid based purely on their private value estimates in order to avoid the winner's curse. In an English auction, players gain the most information about the value estimates of the others, and this additional information mitigates the winner's curse. Thus, bidders shrink their bids less in an English auction than in a sealed bid, either second or first price, or the Dutch auction. And so then the English auction will yield the greatest revenues when there are affiliated values, which is why we see that being the most common auction type that we would encounter, like in eBay. In eBay, everybody does have their own sort of valuation of the item based on like their own assessments of what the item is worth. So in contrast, in first price and Dutch auctions, players learn nothing about other players' value estimates during the auction process. Bidders thus shrink their bids most in the first price and the Dutch auctions. In a second price auction, bidders also learn nothing about the value estimates of others. The fact that the second highest bid is linked to information another bidder has about the item's valuation, though, mitigates to some extent the winner's curse, thus induces players to shrink their bids by less than they would in a first price auction, again, because they will wind up paying the second highest bid. So they will not shrink their bid as much. As a result, with affiliated value estimates, the auctioneer earns greater expected revenues in an English auction than a second price auction, and the lowest expected revenues in a first price or a Dutch auction. And the final demonstration problem of the semester. Suppose your firm is in need of cash and plans to auction off a subsidiary to the highest bidder. Which type of auction will maximize your firm's revenue for the sale if 1, the bidders are risk neutral and have independent private valuations, and 2, the bidders are risk neutral and have affiliated value estimates? So for the first one, doesn't matter. For this one, they're all equivalent, right? So it doesn't really matter, right? What about for the second one with affiliated value estimates? The English auction, right? The English will yield the highest. So with independent private valuations, all 4 auctions will lead to identical expected revenues under these conditions. With affiliated value estimates and risk-neutral bidders, the English auction will yield the highest expected revenues. Good job, folks. Nice job. All right, folks. It's over. Finally, I don't have to talk anymore. Thank goodness. I'm old. My voice not doing so well. Anyway, you guys have a week and a half, folks. Like, it's not just about this course. It's about your futures. It is. You know it. So work really hard. Don't get discouraged. Don't let the craziness of finals get to you. Just like, again, you have time right now. Like, just use that time. Every single moment will count. And in the end, like, you will have a much smoother ride this next week and a half, a much better result if you just, like, again, keep focused and just stay in the moment and constantly keep working, okay? I'll see you guys in a week, and then this will finally be completely over. Hope you guys have a great one. I'll see you next week. Oh, you want one more? I can cover another chapter after the final if you want.